President Trump is expected to sign an executive order, possibly as soon as tomorrow, that would reclassify marijuana to a Schedule 3 drug, which effectively that would just ease the federal restrictions on what's currently a Schedule 1 drug, which is a classification for substances with a high potential for abuse. So we're going from Schedule 1 potentially to Schedule 3. And what can we make of all of this? And what would the ramifications be? Well, joining me now to discuss this is drug policy expert Luke Niforatos, who serves as Executive Vice President of Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Luke, thank you for joining us on Washington Watch. Good to have you.
Congressman, thanks for having me on. God bless you.
God bless you as well. All right, let's start with this. For those who are unaware of all this classification scheduling, how does that work?
Yeah, so, there is this myth out there that, marijuana shouldn't be in the same class as heroin. They're both Schedule 1 drugs. That means they both are considered the worst. But actually, our scheduling system is very different from that. It's not a harm index. It doesn't mean that, if a drug is in 1, it doesn't mean it's the worst drug ever and drugs in 5 are, the least bad. What actually it's based on is whether they have medical use that is accepted by the medical, by FDA, and their level of potential for harm or abuse. It's those two criteria that decide whether a drug gets where it goes in the schedule. And so you have fentanyl, for example, that that nobody would argue it's probably the most dangerous drug out there right now. But fentanyl is Schedule 2 because it has a medical use that hospitals prescribe it for certain uses for patients. So it's not because fentanyl is less bad than marijuana or heroin that it's one schedule lower. It's simply that it's based on both their medical application as well as the potential for harm. So the idea that marijuana would go down to 3 makes no sense because marijuana is not an approved medication. You can't smoke your medicine, and marijuana has gotten much more harmful and more addictive than ever before. That's what all the research is telling us. So this would be a very bad decision for it to go down to 3 at this point.
Okay, you started down that path. I'd like for you to run down there a little bit further and with more clarity. What does the data tell us? Is there ambiguity, in other words, about marijuana and the scheduling of it? What does science and data actually tell us about this drug?
The science and data have actually never been clearer. We have more than 50,000 research studies that have been done. That's something that President Trump said a few days ago he said we need to reschedule it so we can research it. We have more than 50,000 research studies on marijuana. We know everything about the drug. We know about its addictive potential. We know now about the growing trend of increased potency. In the 1970s, marijuana was 2 to 3% potent in your average joint. Now we're talking about new kinds of products like candies, gummies, waxes, shatters that are up to 99% potent. So brand new class of drug at this point, much more potent than it has ever been. And now we're seeing the link with psychosis, schizophrenia, all kinds of mental illness. It's causing violence now. We're seeing in basically every one of the last dozen or so shootings and violent events we've seen over the last couple of years here in our country, the common denominator was marijuana use for those shooters and perpetrators. So we're seeing a lot of very concerning data now. It's not ambiguous. Marijuana is unequivocally much more dangerous than it's ever been. And I think that's why sending a message right now that marijuana is somehow less harmful by moving it to Schedule 3, it couldn't be a worse message. It just couldn't be at a worse time.
Yeah, it's really terrifying what you're sharing. So how strong is the case to reclassify marijuana? Is this like a big movement? Is the president being pushed into this somehow? What is the force behind this?
The case is a terrible one. I mean, let's just not forget where this started, Jody. It started with President Biden making a campaign promise in his 2020 election. He promised to reschedule marijuana. Then Biden took office and he worked with Rachel Levine to totally throw out the rules at the DEA, invent a whole new test, make marijuana qualify as Schedule 3, even though it absolutely does not. So they basically pulled a bunch of chicanery, made a rule that basically they finished the rule, got it all the way up to the point of just needing the president's signature, essentially, and then President Trump took over. So this is a holdover mess from Biden and Rachel Levine. And it is absolutely unthinkable that President Trump wants to take this rule and sign his name to the whole mess and own everything that they put together. So no, the case is not good. But what we are hearing is the reason why that the president is thinking about this is he has heard from a few marijuana CEOs, namely Kim Rivers, who is the CEO of a major pot company in Florida called Trulieve. And we think that promises are being made about the midterms. And I just have, one thing to say to that. If he thinks marijuana is going to help in the midterms, they may say marijuana is medicine, but marijuana is no cure for Trump derangement syndrome. Okay, it's not going to help him get more votes at the midterms. I think people are looking at much more important things there.
All right, less than a minute left. Last question here. There's been rumblings that this could happen as early as tomorrow, the signing of the executive order. Is there still time to speak out on this? What's your message to the White House and to people watching and listening right now? About 30 seconds.
The time is right now. We have heard that his signing ceremony for this is 1:30 p.m. tomorrow Eastern time. So it is coming. Now is the time to call the president, call the White House. We have it on our Twitter. You can go to Luke Niforatos on X, or you can go to learnaboutsam.org, our website. Call the president, call the White House, call the phone number. If you care about this, if you don't want to see marijuana normalized across this country, if you don't want to see President Trump sully his reputation by becoming the most pro-drug president in the history of this country, now is the time to call him.
Luke Niforatos, Executive Vice President of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, thank you so much for joining us.